Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our roundtable on anti-Black racism in Canada. You can use the chat box to tell us where you're joining us today. My name is Elli Dehnavi. I'm the Executive Director at the Center for Race and Culture. I would like to use this opportunity to thank Reach Edmonton for providing technical support. For this session, we have Clayton and Rie who are supporting us behind the scenes. Please be advised that there will not be a Q&A at the end of this session. If you have any comments or questions, please use the feedback form that has been shared with you in the chat box. The form has two sections, first for your questions, and then the second part is for your general feedback on the session. Clayton, can we go to the next slide, please? So even though we are not gathered in the same physical space, we would like to acknowledge the land that the Center for Race and Culture occupies on Treaty 6 territory, traditional homelands for many Indigenous peoples. With this acknowledgement, we pay our respects to the elders past and present who call this land home, and remind all of us gathered here today of the responsibilities we have as treaty people to understand our shared colonial history and work together towards a just future that includes and enriches all peoples. Considering that we will be having a discussion about anti-Black racism today, we want to highlight the existing relationships between Black and Indigenous peoples. And if you are interested to learn more about the subject, we recommend the Yellowhead Institute article titled "Breathe Together, Co-Conspirators for Decolonial Futures," where the authors reflect on the violent conditions bringing Black, Indigenous, and Black Indigenous peoples together and collaborative paths forward. We'll also share that link. We have shared it with you in the chat box. Next. So this session today is part of a new initiative that we have started at the Center for Race and Culture. It's called Challenging Discrimination Through Community Conversations. So we'll have a series of online moderated roundtables and webinars with guest speakers from diverse communities, organizations, academia, general public, and we seek to understand and address experiences of discrimination and exclusion in the Canadian context. In this initiative, we hope to encourage solidarity among groups and individuals interested in promoting social inclusion and equity. So next, please. As I mentioned, this is a community-based initiative, so we welcome ideas and questions for collaboration. Do not hesitate to reach out to my colleagues, Mansoure and Miriam, if you would like to be part of our future conversations. You can also use the feedback form to share your thoughts and questions with us. Next, please. So today we have three guest speakers and a dear moderator. Aurelia Uarsama will be moderating this session for us. Aurelia is an independent consultant on educational policy in Africa, human rights education, anti-racist and cross-cultural learning practices. She's passionate about community work and serves on several boards in the city of Edmonton. She served on our board for a year, stepped in as our interim executive director last year, and is rejoining our board starting from July. We are very excited about that. Next. Our first guest is Jeanne Lehman, who is the founder and chair of Black Canadian Women in Action, which is a bilingual nonprofit organization committed to making a difference in the lives of the minority Black Canadian women living in Western Canada. Jeanne is a community leader. Her list of achievements is long. For instance, she created The Movement, which is an organization that promotes civic engagement by encouraging and educating communities to take part in the social, political, and economic development of Edmonton. Jeanne tirelessly advocates for empowering Black women to explore, invest, and exercise leadership in the Canadian society. Next. Our next guest is Brandon Wint, an Ontario-born poet and spoken word artist for whom the written and spoken word is a tool for examining and enacting his sense of justice and imagining less violent futures for himself and the world he has inherited. For more than a decade, Brandon has been a sought-after touring performer and has presented his work in different countries, including the United States, Australia, Latvia, and Jamaica. His poems and essays have been published in national anthologies, and Divine Animal is his debut book of poetry. And next, our next speaker is Sharif Haji, who comes with over a decade of experience in policy and program design, development, and implementation. Sharif has a strong background in project management, and he serves right now as the executive director of the Africa Center. Before accepting that position, Sharif worked with the Ministry of Seniors and Housing and the Ministry of Health for over 5 years. He also worked with World Vision International in different countries, where he led or managed grant-based initiatives. Welcome, everyone. It's such an honor to have this opportunity to speak with our guests today. And now I hand it over to you, Aurelia.
Thank you very much, Elli. It's always a pleasure being part of initiatives driven by CFRAC, and I am very much humbled and honored to be moderating this debate, and I thank this distinguished guest to be part of this amazing and enriching educational series entitled Challenging Discrimination Through Community Conversations. And like Elli said, we are going to focus on the subject of anti-Black racism. With that in mind, I would like to ask the first question. Ibram Kendi said that the foundation of racism is not ignorance or hate, but self-interest, particularly political as well as cultural. As such, then, how is everyone's feeling about the current situation, the anti-racism protests in Canada, and the conversations focusing on racism here, and how we are being affected by events taking place south of the border? I would like to ask Jeanne if she can answer that question and give us her opinion on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Merci de me donner au Centre de race et de culture d'avoir organisé ce débat. Thank you so much to the Center for Race and Culture to have organized this discussion and to make me be part of this. So I don't even know where to start with this question. I would just say that we are going out, I think we're still living in this pandemic that hit us the hardest. And we all Black, white, yellow, I don't know, name it. We're still living in this pandemic. So, and we see that as human beings, we couldn't find solution. That's why when we have this discussion today regarding racism, systemic racism, and I'm wondering why. So why do we have this debate here in Canada? I think one can say it's happening in the US and not here, so we don't have an issue. I don't think this is true. The problem is we do have a huge issue here regarding Black people with racism, because we have to have this discussion here, because the Black people are face racism in all aspects of their life. So individual, private life, and even in their workplace. So this issue is real here in Canada and here in Edmonton, where we live. That's why it's very important to have this discussion here. As a mother, as a wife, as a sister, we face this, and women, we face this every time. We have to see our children, especially our young boy, when they start growing, when they're still small, small, we don't have that, we don't, not say we don't have, we are like all other parents, you want your children to grow, to go to school, to have that. But we have, as Black women, we do have more, come on, this, we do face more problem when seeing our our children growing up, because we don't know. We always have this fear that our children, maybe something will happen to them. So that's why this debate is very important in our country.
Okay. Sharif, would you like to address the question? And what do you think? What do you think? The current situation is, and if you could just offer us your opinion on that. Thank you.
I concur with, thanks Aurelia and CRC for organizing this. I concur with Jeanne Lehman on the provoking question, which is, why are we having this conversation now in the midst of crisis? The globalization and the current technologies, the empowered citizens are the factors that amplify things that have been going on for years and years. So the reason why we are having the conversation in response, I will say that it was a young person who recorded the murder of George Floyd for 9 minutes. If that person didn't record, we wouldn't have had this conversation. So, I will say that things are happening in the south of the border in the United States. The United States is known it is racial inequality. The one good thing that comes from United States is the collection of the data of when it comes to racial inequality and what happens on race-based information. So that gives us a lot of information to know what happens in the United States. And I think based on that, it's informing the rest of the world how racialization and racism is happening and manifesting in itself in the US. So the conversation that we have now in Canada and how it's impacting our life on day-to-day basis now after the murder of George Floyd is happening all over the world. So you can think of some of the countries that has the least number of Black people, like Lebanon or Palestine, are having demonstrations of Black Lives Matter. So I don't want to take much time. I want to emphasize that that we live in a world where citizens are empowered. For those who live in Edmonton, we have seen the public hearing and how the elected officials in our city council are facing questions that come from citizens with provoking evidences that show that the system and the production of the system that we have today in the country. So I think it is more on the emphasis of globalization, the emphasis of the empowered citizens with information and access to disseminating information wherever they are. That is why we are having this conversation, and that is what is disclosing or bringing up things that have been happening throughout. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to ask Brandon if you can offer us your opinion of the status quo and how is that impacting our community, and if you can give us your opinion on that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all. Thank you all for facilitating this experience, for creating this event. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. In terms of sort of bearing witness to the moment that we're in terms of thinking about racism in Canada, um, it's both a deeply exhausting time for people in Edmonton's Black community, and also a time of enacting forms of leadership and forms of reimagination. So I think um, anyone who's even basically aware of the history of Edmonton or the history of Canada has to be aware of long-standing histories of racism. And so I think um, the sort of eruption of visibility of police violence in the United States has given us an opportunity to sort of um, look at the way racism functions in Canada generally and in Edmonton specifically, and kind of reassess the relationship of white supremacy to everything. You know, reassess the way that uh, white supremacy mobilizes to enact violence of all sorts. I'm I'm pleased for the specificity of this moment. So I think um, racism is pervasive because it exists in sort of the very consciousness through which this country came to be, through which the city came to be, and so I think um, it's a time of opportunity to sort of look at the way that policing in particular is one expression of colonial and white supremacist violence, and it gives us the opportunity to, you know, to put it gently, be in conversation with that violence for the sake of eradicating it or repositioning it for the sake of creating a broader sense of justice. And so yeah, it's a time of work for us in the community, but also a time of imagination and like rigorous discourse and learning and unlearning for Black people and for non-Black people. But I'm grateful for the potential to at least um, yeah, assess our relationships to violence, because that's the only way justice expands.
Thank you very much. Now, I would like to go on and ask the second question, and just um, tying to what you just said, Brandon, about specificity of this moment and how racism has a rampant nature, and its visibility we can deduct and see at so many different levels. I would like to ask Jeanne the second question. What does anti-Black racism look like in Canada? And at a personal level, I mean, what can you share about your experiences? And for example, in the professional realm?
First of all, I want to say to my brother and sister for the communities that this discussion that is taking place is not like against. We are very lucky to be in this country that is the country we love, and people can say, yeah, maybe we should just be happy because Canada is not like another country, but Canada has very high standard for its citizen. So that's why Black people cannot also accept to be accept to be like citizen of second zone. So the discussion we have is not about Black people against other, is about having a discussion on a problem that is real and try to solve this together. So this said, how this, I mean, racism look. As I first say, we have racism as Black people. We face you cannot see when a Black person who will say I never faced racism. So we face this in all aspects of our life. Maybe it's not like in the U.S., but sometimes even I'm wondering, I'm asking a question. Maybe it's not like that because our law here are very strong and how we live there here. That's why also we cannot see what we're saying there. But when you go here in Canada, when we talked about racism, we'll be talking about systemic racism. This is very pernicious and this is not like different. This hurt equally. So we face it all aspects of our life as a woman. Sometimes even people don't know. People who interact with us don't know that what they say, how they see us, the prejudice. They don't understand that it's racist. That's why we talked about systemic racism. I'll give you just example. Sometimes people will say me, oh, I love your hair. Can I touch your hair? But this thing, you can't say that to someone else. But people think that for a Black person, is just, they can just ask and touch and do what they want. I have my son who's grown, he's 21 now. I saw him when he was again small. I didn't face that problem. I didn't know. But then when he started growing up, when he become like, let's say 16, 17, become like a problem. Every time he goes to the store, he will have like someone spying him. If he goes to one shelf, the person will go and he come and tell me, Mom, I don't know. Every time I go to that store, someone is like someone spying on me. So we have that. No, when we take the workplace, the statistics have been here since we see that every time with Statistic Canada. They say to you that you see immigration, me, I'm a French speaker, you are seeing this community, people are coming high qualified, they have it all. Myself, I have 2 master's degree, management diploma. But when you see what I do, where I work, they give you a position that doesn't even make sense. And they want you to be content. It's like, okay, you have this position, you should be happy. It's okay. And also we face racism even in the workplace because sometimes they will have a position, give to someone a position just because maybe sometimes also just to comfort the fact that, or to color, they put a Black person somewhere knowing that maybe this Black person is not competent, just to validate that, you know what, we have given him a position, given them, but they cannot do anything. They are like that. So this prejudice. So when a Black person is well qualified, can do the job, sometimes it's even difficult to hire him because, or her, because in the, I mean, in our, the system, that's why we talked about systemic racism. They don't see you there. They see you as a Black person who have just to say yes, or who have to yes, to work, to do what they want you to do. So if you feel like someone who can be talk, who can be free to talk, who can be free to do things, they don't see it. That's why usually even in the society, in our society, we have, I usually say we have the good, the Black, and then the bad. I don't know how to say it in English, but this is what we usually have even in the workplace. You will see the one who is like quiet, don't say anything, or who doesn't care. Those people can be fine. But when you're someone who can maybe say things, ask things to change, like any other person can do, you will be a problem. You will be like, labeled like difficult and all that. So we face racism in all aspects of our life. In our personal life, workplace, with our children, and everywhere.
Thank you very much for your opinion. I would like to continue with the same question and ask kindly if Brother Sharif can offer his opinion on and point of view of how colored people are portrayed in our society, what racism looks like in Canada, and if you can just give us some of your personal experiences as the executive director of the Africa Center, and give us some examples if you have ever encountered such experiences. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I agree with Jen in terms of no one or no Black person you will find saying that I haven't experienced, to a level where you develop some sort of a resiliency, and you don't live the lives of others, so that you don't even sometimes realize. But it is a day-to-day experiences that we see. But the worst thing that we have here in Canada is the systemic racism. So the systemic racism, if you want to analyze that, understand that, you look into the production of the system. Any system that you put in place, you look into what the system is producing. I studied population health, and I always use examples of that. If you have a specific group of population experiencing specific outbreaks, there is a reason why that particular group is having a problem. The systemic racism, if you want to look into what we have in Canada, of course, our Prime Minister says that yes, anti-Black racism exists in Canada, and some of the populations are experiencing day-to-day racism. But let's look into numbers. Jeanne used some anecdotal or qualitative, some evidence to show that, but I'll just look into numbers, and I would like to look into the numbers that are close to home here in Edmonton. So in terms of education, data that comes from Start Canada tells us that 27% of Black men have bachelor's degree. The same with the general population. So we are equal in terms of education attainment at that level. But when you look into the labor, unemployment rate among Black population is over 14%. That is 7% for the rest of the population. The income rate between Black men and the rest of the population, it's close to 20,000 difference per year. That is data of 28,000 Black individuals collected from Edmonton, and it is a Start Canada data. So that tells you in terms of where we are on education attainment and how that doesn't help you to go to where you want to go, whether it is you're in the labor market or whether you want to make an income. So that amplifies at the family household level. 1 in 3 Canadian, 1 in 3 of the children in Edmonton of Black populations live in poverty. That's 1 in 10 for the rest of the population. This is Start Canada data. So in terms of the life course perspective, that gets transmitted to the rest of the generations. And then you are having this intergenerational situation where you have people in a difficult positions. Then that when it comes to interface with the justice system, it comes to any other aspects of the system. So that is one example. So if you take this to the next level of the intersectionality, and then you bring in, I know that we could be discussing that part of the conversation, but if you bring it that, if you are Muslim, like you have my name like Sharif, then you are facing another challenge here. If we're talking about anti-Black racism now, I understand that. But with that Blackness, if you add again, if you're women, then you are having some more difficulties on top of that. So that is what the system is producing. The system is producing people who are educated, but living in poverty. The system is producing children who are growing in poverty, regardless of the educational attainment of their parents. You're producing a system where those kids will be looking into their parents and see that maybe education is not the way to go. And then you have this interface of what's happening between youth and the justice system. And then you have this incident that is being recorded, and then that is why we're discussing here today. So in terms of how Canadian system is impacting, I will say just look into the data and then look what the system is producing. I want to use the example of what is being discussed now on the issue of the justice. In Edmonton here, you have a police commission. Okay, let's go back to the population in the prison or the justice system that the interface interacting with. So you have 3%, 3.5% of the population being Black, and then you have almost 9% of the population in prison. You have zero representation in your commission. You have zero representation on your leadership in the police system. You have zero representation in the councils that we have. You have zero representation, most of the majority of the agencies, boards, and commissions. This is how you produce and make policies, and these are how you create a system. And at the end of the day, you will be having the production of that system. I'm sorry, I've taken longer time. I will answer in that question in that way.
Thank you very much for giving that. Brandon, so our brother Sharif talked about how the system reproduces inequality and poverty, and at the same time offering education and chances for people to ameliorate their life, but nevertheless, people are still trapped in the poverty, and they don't seem to be coming out of that sphere without the proper economic tools to get out of that situation. So based on that, how does that, have you been affected by that? And how is your experience as a Black individual living in Alberta? If you can give us your opinion on that, or you can share your experiences.
I just want to say first that I really appreciate Sharif for bringing in as much data as you just brought in. That level of systemic analysis is yeah, really relevant to what I had in mind to say, in the sense that you know, encountering this question kind of made me want to reframe it because even if it was the case that I had never personally experienced any overt racism, you know, there are ways to look at inequities that the system is producing and deduce from that that racism is a real thing. So I guess what I want to say, or what I want to do, is sort of gently reframe the question, so as to say that I think one thing that benefits Canada as a nation, and perhaps Edmonton as a city, is kind of moving away from asking Black people to like reproduce the examples of racism in their lives. So as to almost like provide evidence that racism is real here. Like there are so many ways to come to the understanding that racism is real here, even before you get to the level of the personal. So like whether someone has ever called me a racial slur, or you know, whether I personally have been able to access education or not. I think you know, a cursory glance at history, a cursory glance at the sort of numbers that Sharif was just citing for us. These things are accessible. You know, these data points are available to be reckoned with. So I mean, as everyone has sort of reiterated in their own way, you know, every Black person in Canada, perhaps every Black person anywhere, because anti-Blackness is so global, has a litany of experiences to list of ways that they've experienced racism. But I think one of the things that I'm sensitive to in this moment is the way capitalism and neoliberalism, and even just like the the logics of colonialism generally produce this sort of hyper focus on the individual, that you know, then that makes it so that every individual has to like reproduce evidence from their own lives to say that racism is real. Yeah, we know it. We know it by virtue of history. We know it by virtue of data. You know, like I don't know. In I know this is a more general way of answering the specific question, but like I just sort of reject the notion um, that Canada or Edmonton is in a place uh, where we don't know what's up. You know, like if you talk to a 8-year-old in a classroom right now, that 8-year-old is probably able to tell you uh, who gets the best grades, who's the best at math, who struggles with, you know, who's the teacher's pet, you know, who's the best at art, who's the best athlete in the class. You know, like I'm saying, from the age of 7 or 8, we're able to make analyses about like how the structures that influence us are stratified. You know, and so like the notion that uh, we don't already know on a systemic level that you know white supremacy exists is I don't know, is just something that I can't accept. So I don't mean to be abrasive in my answer to the question, but like yeah, reproducing personal examples yeah is exhausting when we already know, or like you know the data shows that like there's no black middle class in Edmonton really. The levels of incarceration proportional to our population size is like out of control. You know, the data is just there to back it up. So whether I went to university, whether anybody ever called me called me the N-word, is like less relevant to me personally. It's not the point of focus that I most care about, because it's about how power moves in the society. And I think Sharif has already done a great job of elucidating some of the ways that power moves to different disenfranchised Black folks here. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. And so there seems to be a general conception that there is a deep-rooted systemic racism in our society, and we ought to analyze that system, and we need to identify and dismantle some of the policies that create these barriers. And with that in mind, how would you dismantle and these types of social impediments that are present in our society at so many different levels? And why is it important to focus on the specific struggles at the individual or community level when it comes to getting rid of that, and how do we go about it? I would like to ask that to Jeanne.
Thank you, Aurelia. So when people say that we all bleed the same and all that, they're right. But when they say there is no racism, they're wrong. And I will even say that this comment is even racist. We cannot deny that we have a problem. So what is happening, what we teach to our children here in Canada, we tell to our children, you know what, when someone say you hurt him or her, you should ask, you should try to see what the person, listen to the person, what the person is saying, and try to see how you can maybe fix it. Have this discussion. This is how we have been taught, or that is what we are teaching to our children. But when we as Black people, we are saying, you see, we face this, and Aboriginal people too, we face this racism. People will say to us, oh, you know, usually you just want to bring your race in this every time. So there is no racism, there is no problem. But Sharif said there is data. It's not like we just, you know, hallucinate and say we have, there is issue. We see that every time in all aspects of our life. So that's why I think it's very important as society to have this discussion, to listen, to understand. As this racism is in the system, is what we call systemic racism. We sometimes don't even realize that some act we will put on there are racist. So that's why, again, try to listen, try to understand when Black people are saying we are hot and the racist exists. Also, I think it's very important as Canadian to ask to ourselves which type of society we want. We talked about diversity and inclusion, but for Black people, usually, yes, diversity, we have it, but not inclusion. So this is what we are talking about. This is what we have today. I think we have this chance to, I mean, something happened for a reason. We have this today, this chance to to come together as a society, to ask to ourselves which Canada we want. Because if we leave some people behind, maybe right now we can be fine, but this won't stop. I can tell you, because today we have this globalization, we have social media, and in any forum I go, Black or where Black people are, you feel that people have, people are, for them it's too much, they cannot take it anymore. So maybe people will think that it's just a trend and then we will forget everything, but it's not true. That's why we don't even have choice. I think we have to fix things right now. That's why this discussion we are starting right now is very important, and we have to continue that discussion, even in a high level. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Brother Sharif, our sister said that this momentum that we're living as a society, we ought to not make it a trend, and we ought not to forget about it, and we need to change the status quo. So why is it important to focus on the specific struggles that our brothers and sisters are living, and how do we change this narrative? How do we bring about understanding, and how do we make the system a better one in terms of eradicating racism? Where do we start? Please share your personal experience as a policymaker and all the cultural baggage that you carry on your shoulders.
Yeah, I think if I'm moved by anything, I am moved by what I have seen in Edmonton. As an organization at the Africa Center, we received over 400 emails or encouraging words from Edmontonians over the past 3 weeks. We have seen 15,000 gathering at the most difficult time in life, when there is a pandemic that you can't get close to each other. The movement of the youth is extremely encouraging, and I think what is happening now is going to address some of those sentiments of people saying that I am a colorblind, I don't see. Like that in itself tells me that you are not authentic. Like if I go to a room with all of them white people, if I tell you that I don't see any color, I'm lying. We just need to be honest to each other and then say that well, let's have an honest conversation that we have a system that is treating people unequally, and we need to change that narrative. What is encouraging, and the conversation that started, is that the elected officials leading, saying that, yes, we have a systemic racism here. When one of your council members comes out and say that, I apologize, I have been part of a system that have practiced racism element in its policy making or decision making processes. So those are some of the things where the conversation started, but I don't think that people will be saying that I don't see that, we are all the same. No, we are not. As I said previously, that Canada doesn't collect race-based information or data. United States does. And what comes out of the United States tells us that, well, the system is not treating people the same. So a good example is that we are just still in the midst of COVID-19, a global pandemic that has not been seen over the past 100 years. We don't know how this is impacting different people. The United States does. What does it tell us? 13% of the population are Black in the US. However, 23% of the deaths happen among the Black population. In Canada, we don't know. Is it because of we don't want to collect the information? Is it because of there will be a time that we'll be looking back and saying that, well, we should have collected that information to inform us how we address the problem. But it's another missed opportunity. So in terms of the conversation, Aurelia, to come back to your question, the conversation that is happening now, the movement among the young population, the empowered citizens with all the information and data in their hands, the globalized world where your current policies that you develop here is informed by what's happening elsewhere, all those things are going to have a significant impact on the conversations that we have in terms of whether we will say that I'm colorblind or not. So I believe that is in the past. From now on, there will be a margin of the population that will be using that. The majority of the population realize the problem, and the conversation will be more, hopefully focusing more on addressing it.
Thank you. So I agree. There are going to be changes in the future, and we have really been revived. And it's very interesting how many people are interested and how much social media has impacted our way of thinking. Now, Brandon, how do you think this will be in vain, or do you think that this awareness will persist in the long run, and it will have a fruitful, impacts in terms of policy making, in terms of, changing the narrative and leaving more quote unquote just measures of to make us a better society, do you think?
Yeah, I appreciate that framing of the question, partially because it kind of reminds me or highlights for me the fact that social movement, or any movement toward justice, or any movement that can be said to want to address anti-racism requires consistency, and so this is just one of several swells in the consciousness that will hopefully align us with anti-racist practices. So I guess to answer your question directly, it really depends on all of us. By all of us, I mean it depends. I think on two things: how rigorously and how honestly we're willing to take stock of the system that we do have in place. So, like, how honest are we willing to be about the presence of racism? How honest are we willing to be about the colonial logics that sort of underpin the systems we have in place now? How honest are we willing to be about the presence of of white supremacy and how that informs uh, who gets power, which communities get resources, et cetera, et cetera. You know, if we're willing to be honest about those things, and if we're willing to um, yeah, say sincerely that what we want is something more equitable, more just, then I think we all have uh, the power and potential to yeah, hold those in power accountable. You know, hold their feet to the fire in terms of um, how it is policy can help remake and reimagine uh, this kind of unjust society that we live in. So I think, yeah, it's a matter of being focused, you know. So that's one of the reasons that I appreciate the present focus on uh, police violence, you know, because you know, maybe at another point we'll have a conversation about intersectionality, but it seems like uh, this conversation around police violence or policing generally is sort of bringing to the forefront um, uh, a larger conversation about racist structure, you know. And so what am I trying to say? I feel like I'm rambling. Forgive me. What I'm trying to say is that reimagining any part of the unjust system um, gives us a deeper way of seeing the full picture of inequity, you know? And so from this point forward, we can use this energy to really pick and choose, you know? Today, most of the energy is focused on police violence. Maybe in 6 months from now, the zeitgeist will shift to a focus on gendered violence. Uh, maybe in 6 months from then, we'll be talking about violence in the workplace. You know, all of these things are interwoven, enmeshed. You know, and so my hope is that the energy that we're gathering right now, with respect to trying to undo police brutality in our community, can be used as sort of a catalyst to expand analysis so we can attack racism and inequity from all the angles that can.
Thank you. Thank you. It's very interesting to see how, for example, like the colonial narrative and the self-interest has been the guiding light for racist structures that uses capitalism to increase profit and use the economics of that. And a clear example is how big corporations have embarked on this whole Black Lives Matter movement, and how, for example, from a marketing perspective, they are shifting how you know, those guidelines that they use to market their products. I'm not going to go on like a specific examples of that, but certainly this whole reawakening and reimagining of the anti-racism movement will, I believe, will take us to a whole new level of achievement for equality of humans and people, and in Canada and all over the world. I just have to ask another question. Um, to Jeanne, if you don't mind answering, what does, for example, this whole concept of intersectionality mean to you as a tool to sort of fight racism? Like, um, how do you feel about using that as a tool?
So this concept is, as Sharif mentioned it earlier. So, you know, some people face that discrimination, not only the fact that they are Black, like women. We are women, we already face some discrimination. We are Black, we face discrimination. Plus we are Muslim, for those who are Muslim. And so you have that you know, all this that overlaps, and you face all that, and you have to find the way to navigate through that. Is a very, it's very hurtful. And this is why we have some women, and especially in our community, who have also the problem of mental health. Problem of mental health is real, because you cannot be, you know, going through all that. You can be strong, and usually we are strong women, as Black women, but it's not the matter of being strong or not. It's the thing that affects you as a human. So we face all those discrimination. You have to come like you're working. You have there, you face discrimination at work. You face the discrimination. Your children face discrimination. Your husband, and you have to take to have all this and try to see how you can navigate into that as a woman. So this is how intersectional this discrimination we face and we are dealing with.
Okay. So in light of that, Sharif, there are some people who say that upending of racial and cultural hierarchies to creates a new one if we embark on this whole intersectionality tool as a way of eradicating anti-racism policies. How would you respond to that critique?
Yeah, I think the issue of intersectionality has been talked about for a while now. In terms of what are we doing with that intersectionality, I'm not too sure. In terms of if we are taking it to actions, we talked about it became a buzzword, unfortunately, that doesn't address some of the problems that we face. And when I say we as a society, I just don't mean as a Black population. So as a society, we talked about this intersectionality, but where does it take it to us? So we have been grappling with some of those discourses or buzzwords that have been played around, whether it is intersectionality, whether it is GBA plus, or whether it is all those kind of aspects. But in terms of putting that in practice is the challenge. Yes, if you are women, if you are Black, if you are Muslim, if you are LGBT, then you have an exceptionally challenging situation to deal with. In terms of addressing that, apart from talking about it, it's completely different. The only way that like someone can see that there is a difference happening is that when you put those discussions into actions. And I give you an example. In our province, we did enact anti-racism advisory council in 2017. In the city, we did the same in 2019. And those advisory councils or committees, whatever name you give it to, both the province and the city were intentional who should be on that committees. Look at them, go and check. You will find the most diverse committee that exists or council that exists. And then take another example or check the other committees that were enacted or that were established. It's not diverse. You don't see that intersectionality. Why do you do one and not the others? When you want to create, as somebody who's an elected official by the public, then when you create that what you want, you can actually create a structure that is diverse, that's covering those intersectionalities. And when you don't want, then you don't create. So that in itself example gives you that having those conversations, but not putting those conversations into action. So we should be having all our committees, whether it is naming committee, whether it is any other committees that are intentionally having those intersectionality lenses so that you have people's representation in across. And yeah, I'm running out of time, so thanks.
I'm very sorry. I just have to step in very quickly. Thank you so much for this conversation. We will continue. This is not the end. I just wanted to say that it's 1 minute past 1 p.m. I'll leave it to Aurelia to wrap this up. Please stay tuned. We will continue this conversation. We will have more sessions with our speakers here and other speakers as well. Thank you. Aurelia?
Thank you, Elli. I appreciate our incredible and wonderful participants of our first online series regarding how to challenge discrimination through a community conversations. I hope this goes on, and we will carry on with other ways of expressing and these important discussions in our society. I would like to thank Jeanne Lehman, Executive Director of Black Canadian Women in Action, Brother Sharif Haji, the Executive Director of the African Center, and lastly, Brandon Wint, a performer, poet, and public educator. Thank you so much for Center for Race and Culture for the wonderful job that you're doing in giving us and exposing us to such important and necessary conversations. And we will continue in the future to have such important times dedicated to these issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.